We love your questions. The number one questions tell us what y'all are thinking about and what's on your mind. But for us, it gives us basically a launching platform to be able to just go dive deep into some areas. So if you got questions, send them to me, either Joe at Fly Casey, Deanna at Fly Casey, but best place to send them is Clint at flycasey.com, because he'll assemble those questions and then we'll do a question podcast. So today I asked Deanna, my wife, how's it going, Deanna?
Excellent. Thank you.
Join me on the question podcast. I always think these are fun.
Yeah, these are fun.
Okay, you get to start.
All right. So we've received some good questions, and Clint has pulled these together. First one's from Russ. And Russ is a professional pilot. He's flying everything from piston singles to mid-sized jets and uses VNAV whenever possible.
We get to talk about VNAV
We get to talk about VNAV. For descents, he believes it simplifies planning, crossing restrictions, and SIDS. I would agree with that, Russ. For unpressurized aircraft, he sets it around 500 foot per minute, and for pressurized ones, he sticks with a 3-degree glide path or adjust for restrictions. So he says that you mentioned in a previous podcast you don't use VNAV for descent and prefer vertical speed, but you did not elaborate. Would you care to elaborate? Now, Russ must not read Pomopa magazine.
Yeah, you're about to say you're liking Russ already.
Right, Russ. If you caught the edition, if you're a PM OPA member and got their magazine, Joe and I did opposing articles on VNAV usage that is probably more for entertainment value than practical value, But yeah, so Joe, why do you prefer vertical speed in a descent over VNAV?
Well, I shouldn't, we wrote that article, which is really, it's a he said, she said article. It's a he said, and we took opposing views of this, but it's not that we do have opposing views on this.
Yes.
Because if I'm flying an airplane, I'm probably not using VNAV. But let me say it differently. I'm not using VNAV during an approach. That's where I really don't.
Well, that's different than what he's talking about for crossing restrictions and SIDS, arrivals and departures.
I would simply say if I'm in on a SID or an arrival, or they give me a crossing restriction on something, VNAV works great. I'm all for it, and I think it's very, very, very useful, incredibly. The problem I've got is in the approach environment, and I've got one other problem is that many pilots, I mean just a majority of pilots that come see me don't understand VNAV.
I agree.
And here's your problem is we've got people using VNAV that don't understand it and don't know how to use it. And we could train this more heavily. The other side of it is just turn it off and then go fly, because we have this lovely thing called a blue banana.
On some of them.
If you got a Garmin, then you got a blue banana, and the blue banana works out fantastic. And so,
is that a technical term?
Blue banana, yeah,
right.
That's a technical term.
If I want to look it up in Garmin's avionics handbook, that's what I'm looking for.
I don't know if it's in the handbook, but that's what everybody calls it. The blue banana is basically the blue banana that indicates where you'll be based upon current conditions, current rate of descent and speed, where you'll be at the altitude that you pre-select. And so it works out really, really well. VNAV works really, really well if you know what you're doing. The problem is that Garmin prioritizes VNAV without you commanding it. And here's my problem, is that you can be on some approach, VNAV pops up, somebody pushes the wrong button, doesn't know what they're doing, and all of a sudden it's a disaster of an approach. That's what I'm really pushing back on. And I think, and we wrote about that in our article, but when you talk to a guy like Russ sounds like a really on it kind of guy. I mean, this is...
He probably understands how the system works and its limitations and uses it appropriately.
This is a pilot's pilot. This is somebody that knows what they're doing. This guy shows up to training. He's going to be in that minority of pilots that really does this well. So I would say, yeah, man, if you know what you're doing, VNAV's great.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're doing, it gets ugly real quick.
If you don't know what you're doing, come see me. I'll train it. don't see Joe. He'll have you turn it off.
With that right there, you know what I'm going to challenge you to do next? I'm going to challenge you to get with Clint and let's get a video about VNAV.
We should, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's make a VNAV video, and let's have you be the star of the show, and then I'll come in there and wreck your show.
All right, coming soon. Coming soon. Okay, question number 2. And Russ, I hope that answered your question on that. Yeah. Question number 2: when using a GPU to start the engine, at what point do you press the battery switch?
Well, the answer is early, and I definitely have it on. Now, there's one time you don't. And that one time you don't is if you have a bad battery or a dead battery.
So let's talk through the early and having it on, because that is not necessarily the POH procedure. So why do you recommend having it on during the start process when the POH has you turning it on later in the start, after the start?
And it is one good reason. And here's that good reason. If anything happens to the electrical power being delivered to the engine, and let's assume for discussion purposes that we're talking about a turbine. Right. If you're talking about a piston.
With a nice healthy battery.
A turbine with a nice healthy battery. Mm-hmm. Exactly. In other words, you're electing to use the ground power because it's going to deliver more amps and get you a cooler start. So there may be a place where you're just thinking, okay, I'm in the mountains at high altitude and it's hot outside. Or it's a free GPU. If they offer a free GPU, use a free GPU 100% of the time. Yes. It's free. It's there. It turns your start. Basically, it's good discussion to be able to say, the higher the NG turns, the more electrons that go into your starter, the faster your starter turns, the easier your starter turns the engine, the cooler the start. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's an inverse. In other words, the faster the NG, the cooler the start.
Sure.
So the best way to overtemp your engine to get what's called a hot start is to have a weak battery, or have conditions, and there can be a bunch of different conditions like high altitude, high density altitude, which means there's hot temperature outside. Got a tailwind, especially on a jet prop. Where, Meridians and M600s, M700s tend to be less worried about, tailwinds, but because they have so many openings into the engine. But on a jet prop, you're doing with the ice door closed and the air's coming into the front. The best thing to do is turn the airplane into the wind. But you have all these factors that are going against you. And one other one, you already have a hot engine. In other words, you came in, you shut down, you're going to drop passengers off, and you're going to be gone in 5 minutes. That's going to be a hotter start because there's residual heat in the engine. And if they got a cart start that's available to you, take it 100% every time. So I'm a huge fan of GPU power, huge fan. One little caveat is that the jet prop has the external plug-in up at the very front inside the baggage compartment.
And right behind the prop.
Right behind the prop. It's up there close. You got to have a qualified person that can close the baggage door in the front. You need to start in feather instead of having it so that you're not blowing the... Mm-hmm. There's a bunch... Jet props tend to be a little more messy, and you're going to need a little more assistance in terms of external power. Meridians, M600s, M500, M700, fantastic. I mean, wonderful, because the external receptacles in the back of the airplane way away from the prop, and the chances of you getting hurt or hurting anybody is remote.
Right.
So, but let me throw down one thing, and this happened to me. This was probably, 3 years ago or so. I was in Jacksonville, Texas, and early morning, and of course had a weak battery and had to use a GPU. So I had my battery off. Okay. Now let's back up for just a second. When would you want the battery switch off? And the answer is when you have a weak battery. Basically, when a battery will receive all the power you can give it. And when you give a battery a lot of power at one time, a lot of energy, in other words, if it's depleted, it will receive all the energy it can have and boost itself up in capacity very quickly. That quick boost up can hurt the battery. In other words, if you just send a gazillion electrons to that battery, to that depleted battery, that battery will not behave as well. Let me give you a good example. We have what we call a trickle charger. Trickle chargers trickle the energy into that battery, which is a more healthy way to increase the capacity or the voltage. If you want to think of that, how much energy is stored in the battery, you're resupplying that energy at a slower rate. It's healthier for the battery. So if you hook in a GPU, which has an unbelievable amount of amperage and a weak battery, and go hit your battery switch, then you're asking all these electrons to flood to the battery. And you can probably hurt your battery, certainly hurt it. So you don't want to do that. So if I have a weak or a low battery,
what would you consider weak or low?
Anything below 22 volts.
Okay.
Yeah, you go out to your Meridian, it's below 22 volts, and you knowingly say, I'm not starting this engine. Ding, ding, good job. When I go inside there and you plug in external power, no power goes to the battery unless you hit the battery switch. Now, as many electrons as will go to the battery, but it's just so many of them. And so the better thing to do is leave the battery switch off and start the engine. But there's a threat, and here's what happened to me. I remember it was like twilight, still dark outside, and I got the lights on the airplane. I got the lights on the cockpit lights on. The guy that was helping me was well-meaning and nice. And I briefed him well. But again, now let's go back to this. Ground guys maybe aren't the smartest guys in the world or the most knowledgeable. And in this case, this particular person was well-meaning and intentional, but got in his brain that when the engine starts, he's going to pull the external power. And so I hit the start switch. The engine began to start up, got through probably 30% NG or so. And he went to the back of the airplane, pulled the external power out. Now you have no power going to that engine, and instantly your panel goes completely dark because your battery switch is off. And now you don't even know what your ITT is. I mean, it's a heaven for hot starts. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can hot start the engine and not even know it.
Right.
And because now you have no instrumentation, so that having that battery on is real important. So it's this thing between are you going to hurt your battery by giving it a bunch of power? Do you have a responsible person that's not going to pull the external power until you give them the sign, which is a T? Mm-hmm. Basically apply power and then remove external power. And you go all the way through the engine start. Now the engine's completely started. Now what you can do is pull the external power and turn on your battery, then hit your alternator, which your alternator is a lower source of power, and have that slowly recharge your battery. So to give it that first initial hits. Matter of fact, if you look at a jet prop, one of the things in a jet prop, we start the jet on just a routine normal battery start in a jet prop. You start your airplane, and then you use the alternator to replenish the batteries.
And then you add your generator.
Why? Because I want that lower power source to give the power to the batteries so I don't hurt the batteries. So there is a dance here. And if you look at the POH, what the POH is really trying to tell you when it says have the battery switch on, what they're trying to do justifiably is preclude what I just said to happen. In other words, where somebody pulls the external power or you have a break in external power and you got nothing backing you up. So this is why when you start the engine, if you have a decent battery and you landed at a place where the engine's hot, you're at high altitude, the DA's high, whatever the case, or it's just freely available and you have external power, hit the battery switch, because if somebody pulls that external power switch out or the external power out, it will instantly go to the battery, and the batteries will flow from the electrical energy will flow from the battery to the starter, keeping the start sequence going. It's like a backup to the external power. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So there's a dance between hurting your battery and hurting your engine. The best thing, have a good battery 100% of the time. If you do, hit your battery switch, because if you have a battery that's topped off, then there's no problem, because the electrons are not going to flow to a positive battery. Your battery's already topped off. The battery's not needing that power. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So yes. So if you got a good battery, hit your battery switch and have that be part of the start sequence. If you have a low battery, due to whatever reason, maybe you left a light on, or something on the battery, on the hot battery bus was left on for whatever reason, and you come back out there and your battery's below 22%, and you choose wisely. What's my two things? Is it, am I going to hurt my battery, or do I have a responsible person to assist me by pulling the power at the appropriate time?
Okay.
Long answer to that one.
That was a long answer.
Sorry. Where it goes. All right, I got one for you. You ready for this?
Oh, I don't know.
No, this is pretty. Actually, this is going to be we'll have fun with this one. This is from Steve, who gives us a bunch of questions. Basically, he's a I don't know what his age is, but his aviation age, meaning how many hours does he have in his credentials, is lower. And he's dreaming of the day of getting into the PA46 world. And so he asks, can you talk about the current insurance climate of just what's going on in the insurance world right now? What's his prognosis for being able to get into the PA46 world? Yeah,
so surprisingly this year, and I know these podcasts hang around for a long time, so this is November of 2024, and as of right now, the insurance market actually looks pretty good for both older entrants to the market and lower time entrants to the market. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that was not the case. 70 was almost a hard cutoff date for age in insurance, and where you really saw it difficult to insure at all, or premiums just went way up. And low time wasn't as favorable, but the market has softened to both of those, and we're seeing policies written up to age 80 now, which is great for those who are healthy and alert and responsive. There's a lot of things that are happening when you're closing in on 80 that should make you wonder if you should be in a PA46. But if you're there and that's you, then policies are being written up to age 80. So yeah.
When the insurance industry, when there's few entrants into in other words, when you have few underwriters, when they have low competition, then underwriters tend to find any area that they don't like to increase the quality of their risk, meaning that they only want the best risk to happen. And so if you're over 70, or if you've had a claim, or if you have an older airplane, or you have damage, you have damage history, if you're a low hour applicant, don't have an instrument rating, things of this nature, then you don't have as many underwriters
willing to take the risk that you present.
Right. You have less competition, and basically you get fewer, and sometimes you're just uninsurable. When you have more, what's happened in the last year is that we've had two new entrants, two new underwriters that have entered the fray, and there's about to be two more that are entering the fray. That's going to be four new underwriters compared to what used to be a very low number in certain and not some of them, there's some of them that will only do the turbines, and there's some of them that won't do any insured value over $1 million. And there's some underwriters that will do PA46s, but nothing under $1 million. There's markets that they like within the market.
Yes.
Yeah. But we're about to have four new ones, or we've got two new ones. We're about to have four. So the point is, it's the outlook in the future is very good. The pendulum was all the way to one side. It swung where it was cheap, affordable, and insurance was readily there. It swung all the way to the other side within from COVID on. That was just horrible. Really hard to get insurance. It is swinging the other way now.
Yes. So he also asked how many hours, total hours, complex hours, high performance, retract, etc., are recommended before an initial transition. And keep in mind, he's a lower time pilot. He does have an instrument rating. He's currently flying a Turbo 210. So he's already got some of these hours. So he's taking the steps he believes he needs to take before entering the PA46 market. So for your 200-hour pilot with an instrument rating, flying a Turbo 210, or maybe somebody's transitioning from a Saratoga, or those are your retractable gear. You may also have someone coming from a Cirrus who has the TAA aircraft, but not complex. The gear doesn't move. How much time do you think they need in those aircraft before they make the leap into a PA46?
The key is there's not a limit. There's not a written down number. There's nothing that says that. I can remember one pilot that had 350 hours and went directly for a $5.5 million TBM and got insured. Now,
all it takes is money.
All it took, that's right. He had a 5.5 million, but he had a 100-hour minimum, that he had to get CFI to sit in the right seat for 100 hours, and his premium was 6 digits. It was huge.
Right.
But he got insured. And there's even one of the Great Americans, one of the underwriters, that's kind of well known as the underwriter that sort of seeks out that higher premium and will insure you at a lower number. In other words, that's sort of a market they go for because they know they get a higher premium. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. I'm thrilled they're there, and I like them. Matter of fact, we train for them a lot. And so that's really good. My contention, if I were a low-hour pilot, let's say like this person is, 200 hours, instrument rating, when can I get in? And my answer would be, come as early as you can. Because there's two sides of it. You want to be proficient and you want to be insurable. We'll make sure you're proficient. In other words, we'll make sure of that. In the insurance company, when the earlier they allow you in, like I wouldn't say, I'm going for 500 hours before I'm coming. Because if you can get in at 300 hours, great. You get more time in that high quality experience. And when you come, we can usually train a pilot to, up in that scenario. So it's just cheaper instead of I'm making this up, but let's say this person was in a Cirrus airplane at 200 hours and they want to move up to a PA46. Better to move up to a PA46, pay a higher insurance rate, pay a higher premium, than to sell the Cirrus, go buy a Baron or I'm making it up, a retractable gear Bonanza to say, well, I need 100 hours of retract time. No, there's not a limit. Come as early as you can. It's usually cheaper to pay that premium, to get that good instruction, than it is to just say, well, I'm going to wait till a long time. Better to get in the better airplane early and fly around pressurized at the high altitudes. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I throw a little corollary? Anyway, a little addendum to this. It was interesting that PMOPA did a questionnaire that went out to find out a whole bunch of basically what's our population look like, and it came back that they said that 30% of the PMOPA population doesn't have an instrument rating.
Right. So let's talk about where you might find those pilots. So clearly they're not flying in the flight levels, so their airplanes are going to be underutilized because they can't get above 17.5, right? So you're really missing out. I have to think all these guys are in pistons and not turbines, because gosh, if you had to fly a turbine around at 17,000 all the time, you're doing your wallet a huge disservice compared to just going and getting that instrument rating, right? So these have to be piston guys, likely matrix owners, unpressurized, potentially.
Could be.
Malibu Mirage. So again, they're limiting themselves a little, but those planes like it in the 16 to 17,000 range. But yeah, what are your thoughts on?
Well, I think PMOPA is wrong. I don't know. I mean, the question was asked poorly, or they gathered the data wrong, or something. I get a pilot once every 2 years that comes to us and says, "I don't have an instrument rating. I want to be." I'm sure the numbers are different. I'm sure some people look at us and say, "Well, they're not going to do this anyway." I don't know. Maybe they're going to. I don't know what they're doing. I'm sure it's a little higher, but when we were at the PMOPA convention, they had 3 underwriters sitting up on the stage, and somebody posed the question, every single one of those said, if you don't have an instrument rating, we're not insuring you. Period. Case closed. My bottom line is, don't even think about entering this world without an instrument rating. I think the 30% answer is completely wrong. And my contention is, this is an airplane that you absolutely need an instrument rating. You need an instrument rating in this space.
I agree, you do. I don't actually think their data is wrong, though. I think those are just the people that aren't coming to training. I think we're not seeing them because nobody is seeing them.
I'm very interested in it. To me, this is an area where there needs to be more probing. If you're listening, PMOPA, if you're listening, let's put out another questionnaire. Let's make sure the questions are good and right, and let's find out what these are, who these people are, because the insurers don't want a non-instrument rated pilot. Let me say it differently. The M-class airplane is a cross-country airplane that all the PA46s go over 800 nautical miles, travel across weather systems. You absolutely and unequivocally need an instrument rating to be able to fly these airplanes properly. Can you fly a matrix or something to go flying around the traffic pattern? Yes. You can fly anything around. You can fly by a 747 and go, piddling around, but no one's doing that. PA46 is a serious cross-country machine, and you need an instrument rating to be able to fly it. And if you ask me, if anybody comes to me and says, I don't have an instrument rating, I want to fly this airplane, I'm going to say, let's go get you an instrument rating. Let's buy it and have the instrument rating part of the training. Let's get you toward this, because you need to be able to fly an instrument rating. You need an instrument rating to fly this airplane properly and well and safely.
Yes.
You're going to get yourself in a jam if you don't.
I agree. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
So a few more from Steve here. He was talking about he was asking about useful additional ratings and trainings and what might be required, not required. And so he said useful but not required, maybe a commercial certificate. And I believe at the panel, the underwriters did say advanced ratings are looked upon favorably.
Absolutely.
CFI, always helpful. PA46 piston time, I'm guessing maybe he's talking about if you have that and you're transitioning to a turbine, but I would say that's not necessarily a requirement. You can absolutely jump straight to a turbine without having gone to the PA46 piston route.
Let me answer this, and again, there was such a good class with the underwriters talking about insurance. That was, if you missed that class at the PMOPA convention, it was one of the better ones. I've been to probably 12 conventions over the last year, however many years, and this was the first time that there was an insurance class with underwriters standing on the stage.
Right. Most of the time you can corner a broker or two that's around there, but It's difficult to get the underwriters and have them on stage willing to answer questions.
That's right. And before I say that, let me also say that there was people like Tom Haig was there. Tom's one of the best brokers in there in the PA46 market, and he was there at the convention. The people that are involved in this market were there. The convention had them, and there was 3 underwriters up on the stage that were up there, and that made it incredible to have those 3 people up there answering questions and be able to do it. But one of the things that came out of this is they talked about it, and they put a name to it. It's called the white paper. They basically said, whenever you renew your insurance, never just give them the data. Don't ever do that. Give them the data and give them a white paper is what they call it. Now, I'm sure it's not a white paper per se, but the idea behind it, you got a sheet of paper that lists the things that you have that differentiate you from the crowd.
Right.
And a crowd is a guy or a girl with a private license and an instrument rating.
Right. Yeah. If you are just filling out the form that the broker handed you, the underwriter is not getting a full concept of who you as a pilot are in regards to how many times a year are you training, what types of training events are you going to, what additional flying are you doing. They miss a lot with just your stock form. So you're saying give them some additional information, and
But even if it's just a list of things, I went to the convention this year. I went to 6-month mid-year training. I flew with my local CFI and did a BFR, an additional BFR and ICC. I have a glider license, a commercial license, a CFI. I got my wings credits through attending whatever training thing, whatever it happens to be that you are, that makes you different than a regular old person that didn't take the time to do this. So is it valuable to get a multi-engine rating or a seaplane license or a glider? Yes, because when the insurance underwriter looks at you, what an insurance underwriter is looking for is filling their book of business with the best quality, most safety conscious candidate that they can. Their whole thing is collect premiums and pay out nothing. That's how they make money.
Right. It's a business.
So how can we do this? And so if you'll differentiate yourself by submitting that white paper with credentialing that you've gone to seek, it's going to make you better. And it's going to make you a better pilot. It's going to make you look better on paper. It's going to be a white paper. It's going to be on that white paper that goes to the insurance industry.
Okay, so going on, he also mentions useful for proficiency only, tailwheel, which we are big fans of tailwheel training. Will make your landings better in every airplane you fly. But then he mentions multi-engine piston. And I would disagree here. I don't think learning to fly a multi-engine is useful for anything related to the PA46. I would say multi-engine rating is only good for flying a multi-engine aircraft, because the whole point is learning what to do when one of those engines fails.
I would say I would agree wholeheartedly with the flavor of your statement. I would support it that I think anything you do in aviation makes you better. Any aspect of any other type of aviation makes you better in aviation in general. So getting a multi-engine rating, great, lovely. You're going to learn something there
about multi-engine aerodynamics.
You will, but you're learning about aerodynamics. So you're hearing about angle of attack and adverse yaw and adverse thrust and windmilling props and all these. Windmilling prop has a lot of implication for a turbine that fails. So there's some stuff there. It's not, but would I rather you have a glider license or a multi-engine?
Yeah,
glider. Hold on. Would I rather you have a glider license or a multi-engine rating?
A glider.
Would I rather you have a seaplane license or a multi-engine rating?
Sure. So this is where I was going. He implied not useful at all would be a seaplane. And I would say a seaplane is highly useful, not because you're going to be out there landing on water, but you learn so many things about wind cues. I mean, one of the most helpful things I learned in a seaplane rating was, you're in an airplane that has very little instrumentation.
Right.
And you're landing on a place that doesn't have an AWOS, right? And so you really learn to read wind cues and what's happening with your drift and your setup, from external cues versus what you have available there in the cockpit. And I think that's translatable to anything, whether it lands on land or water.
So let's say it a little bit differently. All aviation training will make you better at all aspects of aviation. A broader trained pilot is a better pilot. And of all the training events that you can go to, multi-engine is probably the least impactful.
Right.
Maybe. I don't want to discourage anybody from getting a multi-engine rating unless you're going to buy a multi-engine airplane. It's good training, but it's not. I'd rather you go get a glider rating, because now you're practicing engine out maneuvers and learning what energy, and you're learning GABA stuff as far as getting a glider license, a CFI, license to learn, a commercial license, higher level, going for the ATP, far more, learning to fly more precisely and showing it in a practical test to an examiner. All of those, instrument examiner, fabulous. Multi-engine, good, not great. Or I'm saying, just not as impactful in our space.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Do partnerships screw up the equation?
for insurance. I think, or for getting into an airplane, there's one place that it does. If you have too many pilots listed on a policy. In other words, if an insurance company is looking at a policy, it's one pilot, one insured, and let's just say that you've got 4 pilots that are listed in the policy. They will frown on that. In their minds, in an insurance company's mind, if there's many pilots listed there, their risk goes up because many pilots are flying the airplane. They don't know how many hours you're going to fly. But if there's one pilot and he flies 100 hours a year and there's 4 pilots, that means they're up to 400 hours a year is their mindset behind it. So can a partnership have a higher rate? And the answer is yes. And the other side of it is that the insurance is usually quoted based upon the lowest common denominator. So if you're a high time aviator, let's just say you're a 2,500 hour pilot with 1,000 hours of turbine time, and your partner is a 200 hour pilot with no turbine time, the guy that got the 2,500 hours is going to hate his insurance premium.
Right. Yeah. Because they're going to base it on the 200
Yeah.
hour.
So yes, more pilots, greater risk. Insurance companies don't like it as much. You're probably going to get a lesser quote.
Okay. And Steve, if that was not an insurance related question, I believe we did a whole other podcast on partnerships.
As far as just are they good or are they bad?
Are they good or are they bad? The pros and cons. Yeah. So definitely a much longer topic for a different podcast.
Yeah.
But that's
I got one more question for you.
Oh.
You ready for lunch?
Bonus. I'm ready for lunch. My stomach, can you hear my stomach growling through the mic? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Joe Casey and
Deanna Casey.
Signing out.